In the name of Allah Almighty, the most beneficent and the most merciful. It is lecture number 9 of popular fiction, and the topic that we have to cover today is critical analysis of burnt shadows. In the previous lecture, we have discussed the summary of burnt shadows, the main characters, and also the important things like the characters interaction with one another, that what they had been doing in the novel. And we have looked into the summary of the novel as well. And in this lecture I'll be discussing critical analysis of burnt shadows. Before going into the detail, I would like to mention, or I would like to explain the critical analysis. This analysis is based on analyzing the novel from different perspectives, like from the perspective of feminism, from the perspective of Marxism, from the perspective of other literary theories, and along with that, analyzing the language of the novel, that what kind of figurative devices like similes and metaphors are used in the novel. So such kind of analysis is called as critical analysis. So in this critical analysis, what topics we have to cover are introduction. First of all, there is an introduction of what we are going to study today. Then there's a stylistic analysis of the novel. Stylistic analysis means the language analysis. Historical fiction, then we will discuss how this novel is an example of historical fiction. There is feministic analysis, and the past reflections, political aspect, themes, and then there is conclusion. Alright, starting with introduction. Shamsi's Burnt Shadows consists of 4 parts, each of which tackles a particular period of time. Section 1 treats 1945, the year of the bombing of Nagasaki. So it means there are 4 parts, and out of that 4, the first deals with the bombing of Nagasaki. It is a city of Japan on which the bomb explosion occurred in 1945, and as a result lot of people were died. Okay, section 2 handles 1947, and 1947 is the year of partition of India and Pakistan, and on the brink of partition came the same. The third tackles 1982 Pakistan, while the fourth is devoted to the 2001 and to the post 9/11 event period. So in 1982 there was a different political system in Pakistan, and in 2001 and 2 there occurred 9/11, like the bombing of the World Trade Center in America. As a result, what happened afterwards, like what happened in Afghanistan and Iraq, it is also described in this novel. So in this sense, this novel deals 4 historical events in 4 different parts. Okay, so first of all, I would like to discuss the stylistic analysis of Burnt Shadows. Kamila Shamsi's style of writing is unique, and this is clear in her novels. One of the important features is that she paints picture through the rhetorical devices and visual images she uses in her fiction. So rhetorical devices are such devices in which there occurs some kind of repetition in order to emphasize the saying. For instance, you keep on asking, okay, does our lives matter? For example, if that person keeps on asking this question, okay, do I matter? Question mark. Do I matter? Does our lives matter? So what is our purpose? So such kind of question, when you keep on asking the question and this question let other person think about that matter, that is what is called as rhetoric. So such kind of devices like questions are asked in the novel. Visual images, it means that presenting scenes in such a way that you feel that same thing is happening in front of you. So this is what is called as visual image. So she has used these 2 devices in her novel. One is rhetorical device, another is visual images. This can be seen in the following example. So the same can be seen in the example. Okay, she seemed lodged like a tear in the corner of my eye, evaporating in the instant I turned to look at her. Lodge means to move down, to roll down. So she seemed like she had rolled down a tear in the corner of my eye. So it was like that a tear rolled down like from the corner of my eye. She was like that, evaporating in the instant I turned to look at her. So what happened when I started looking at her? So her tears seem to be evaporating. So this extract is from her novel, that is Broken Verses. So in order to establish a relationship between how she depicts, she presents her language, she uses different figurative devices. I have taken example from Broken Verses as well. So like a tear, see here it is used like a tear, that the simile is used, and she has created an imagery. You just keep on imagining how that thing would happen, that she herself seemed to be like a tear, and at once when I looked at her, her tear was evaporated. So that is from the Broken Verse. So the from the Burnt Shadows, that extract that I have taken is: the sky and ground were in different centuries, one cut open by the blades of a huge chopper, the other smothered by a collapsed fort and the remnants of mud houses. After 2 decades of war, barely anything lived here other than juniper bushes and small group of villagers. Burnt Shadows, 2009, page 279. So she has depicted cities, characters, situations in such a way that you feel the same thing is happening in front of you. The same events had happened, and you had been the witness of that event. So the clever way of describing city's character situation is memorable. She gives the reader a full understanding of the situation. Yes, a full understanding. For example, in describing Afghanistan after the Cold War, what happened? After the Cold War, Afghanistan, because during the Cold War there was a war between uh, Russia and America. So America actually restricted Russia from entering into the Afghanistan. As a result, the Afghani Taliban were prepared in order to tackle those Russians. So what happened? As a result, the Russians had attacked Afghanis and also their cities. So what happened after their attack? The sky and ground were in different centuries. It seemed that everything is destroyed, and it seemed that nothing was there before, and the cities that had been destroyed, and it seemed they belonged to the previous centuries when there was no development. One cut open by the blades of the huge chopper. So what happened? The ground, it was chopped, it was cut by the blades of the chopper. Huge chopper, chopper means the helicopters. So the bomb they used to drop, they cut down the earth. The other smothered by a collapsed fort and the remnants of mud house. So what happened? If at one part of the earth or the ground they used to throw bomb, the other side was collapsed and fort was collapsed. And smothered means to kill someone by restricting their breathing. So as a result, so it seems that the mud house, there were remains of only the mud house, and everything was smothered like fort, like houses. They were just smashed to the ground. After 2 decades of war, barely anything lived here other than juniper bushes. So what happened? There was a war for 2 decades, mean for 20 years. Nothing was left other than juniper bushes and small groups of villagers. So only there were small group of villagers and juniper bushes. So this is how she has used the language. She has used language in such a way to present the scenes as if the same had happened in front of you. And the simile is skillfully conducted by Shamsi as in the following quote of Hiroko's vision of teaching. So she has used simile in her language as well. Images of classrooms sweeping into her thoughts, the way memories of flight might enter the minds of broken winged birds. So what happened? She was when everything dashed to the ground in front of the Hiroko's eyes, like when bomb had exploded and Japan was destroyed, Nagasaki particularly. So what happened? This the classroom of the Hiroko where she used to study. So it seems that the image is swooping means coming in front of. into her thoughts, the way memories of flight might enter the minds of broken-winged birds. So mm, there was, some sense of loss in her. She cannot go back to the same place. She cannot have such kind of memories again because everything was destroyed. She was having such kind of feelings as when a bird had broken its wings, and birds had just only the wish of flying and it cannot fly because its wings had been broken. So the same feeling was of Hiroko when she got the vision of the teaching. Okay, historical fiction. How this novel is an example of historical fiction, or what is there? As I have told you earlier, that there are four politically historical events narrated in this novel. That is why we call this at historical fiction. The setting of her novel mixes between fiction and reality. Yes, there are some sort of reality. There is some bit. There's a bit of fiction. History and imagination, everything is not reality and everything is not fiction. It is a mixture of both. There is a mixture of history and imagination. Some points, some situations had been imagined and some belong to the history. Also, there is a striking variety and shifting in place and time. History is certainly there when she informs the reader about painful factual details such as the partition of the Indian subcontinent. Yes, when she narrates that is a painful details of the partition of Indian subcontinent, the destruction of Nagasaki, the Afghan war, the September 11, 2001, and the war against terrorism. So all such events, all such political events, they contributed into writing the historical fiction because such events happened in the history. Her mixture between the memory and reality, past and present, factual and fictional, are brilliantly presented as seen in the following extract. So here we have an extract from the novel. Although it was December, the afternoon sun was still hot, and the sea breeze, which had been so refreshing just a couple of miles back, seemed unable to force its way through the thick fumes. Harry distracted himself with architecture, admiring the loveliness of an enclosed balcony jutting out from a Yellowstone colonial building, its lower half fashioned from delicate woodwork, its upper half colored glass. So it was a December afternoon sun. So what happened? The sea breeze, although it was so, this scene depicts a place of Karachi. So what happened? The sea breeze, which had been so refreshing just a couple of miles. So what happened? Just a couple of miles ago, the sea breeze, which was very refreshing, but it find it difficult to make its way through the thick fumes. Thick fumes means the fumes that were arising because of the explosions. Harry distracted. Explosions means at different places because of the skirmishes, because of the clashes between Talibans, because of the clashes between Talibans and the Americans. Harry distracted himself with architecture. So what happened? He got to know that there were some thick fumes arising from the places. So he distracted himself with architecture, admiring the loveliness of an enclosed balcony jutting out from a Yellowstone colonial building. So, the place where he was sitting, he started admiring that place, the way it was constructed, its architecture, the balcony was looking at. So, he started admiring it. So, what happened? Its lower half fashioned from the delicate woodwork, its upper half colored glass. So, half of the colonial building, it was made of woodwork, and half of the upper half was made of glass. So he started admiring the architecture in order to distract himself from what was happening. Okay, it's feministic analysis. So for any human being, feministic analysis means analyzing the text from the feministic perspective, just talking about the rights of the women, where the women rights are violated. So we analyze it. For any human being, the greatest trauma is to lose her or his home where he or she has spent the loveliest memories of childhood and youth, which remind her or him of the past. Exactly, it happens wherever you leave from to which place you belong. You always have the recollections and the memories of that place, and you want to go back to that place again and again. But because of destruction, Nagasaki was not in its original condition. Rather, what happened? It was destroyed, and it was very difficult. It was impossible for Hiroko to go back and enjoy the memories. Nagasaki, the home of Hiroko, is displayed in two pictures. A beautiful and charming one before the explosion, and the catastrophic one which turned Hiroko's life into a terrible hell. Okay, so just let's ask a question. So, what wrong Hiroko had done in order to deserve that life? So, being woman, she had suffered a lot. She had lost her lover, and then she had to move to the India in order to search, the relatives of her lover, so that she can have a safe place to live. So she moved to the India. So she had only two pictures before her, the pictures of the explosion and the catastrophic one, like the beautiful and charming one before that explosion and the other after the explosion. Hiroko decides to leave Nagasaki, seeking for a new life in Delhi, trying to follow her late fiance Conrad's relatives. Conrad has a half sister in India, married to a colonial British conservative called James Burton. As soon as Hiroko arrives in their home, Shamsi alludes to the patriarchal culture dominating both the British and Indian societies in that. So when she moved there, she had to face certain kind of, cultural mentalities, like cultural dominating there, patriarchal culture particularly. And Hiroko's, and that Conrad's husband, he actually asked her that how she made her way from Japan to the India. So she said, I have been working in Tokyo since soon after the war ended as a translator. Someone I knew there told me about a friend of hers who was coming to India, to Bombay. So how did she come to the India? There was a friend of hers whose friend was coming to the India. So she accompanied him. We met and I convinced him to let me travel with him. And from Bombay, I took the train to Delhi. What alone? James glanced over at Elizabeth and he asked at once, "Oh, how come you came here alone? How could you come alone?" He glanced at Elizabeth. Yes, why can't women travel? Alone in India? Elizabeth almost laughed. Elizabeth, she was sitting with James. James gives his justifications as, but there are rules and there's common sense. I certainly wouldn't allow Elizabeth, you know. So he said that I wouldn't allow my daughter Elizabeth to go somewhere alone. So you being women and you had traveled from Japan to India, so it was a kind of shocking news for James, the husband of Conrad. And here we got to know that there were certain patriarchal culture that was dominating there who did not allow women to travel alone, rather she had done. So that is why we find the feministic aspect here. Okay, past reflection. So the horrifying picture of Nagasaki makes Hiroko have a flashback of the city when it was full of life and activity. Hiroko asks if there were an adjective to best describe how changed Nagasaki has. She decides that would be it. Everything distilled or distorted into its almost functional form. She walked past the vegetable patches on the slopes a few days ago and saw the earth itself furrowing in mystification. Okay, so she just recollected how the things were there in the Nagasaki. She started thinking about, she started recollecting, reflecting her past, moments which she spent in Nagasaki, and she just thought of the potatoes, and she said, why potatoes? Where once there were azaleas. Azaleas means colorful rows of potatoes. What prompted this falling over of love? So what happened to them? What made them, get destroyed? How to explain to the earth that it was more functional as a vegetable patch than a flower garden, just as factories were more functional than schools, and boys were more functional as weapons than as humans. So, what happened? That she says, how can I explain to the earth that it was more functional, that it was having more vegetable patches than a flower garden? It is like as factories were more functional, that factories are considered more important than schools and the boys. So people think that something which you can earn by selling, or by production in the factories, so that is more valuable as compared to the education. So she says that I cannot explain to the earth that with the things which are considered important on the earth are not actually the important. because uh, factories are considered more important to the schools. All right, and boys were more functional as weapons than as humans. So boys, when they had weapon in their hands, and when they are, you know, loaded with the weapons, they are considered more functional, they are considered more important as a human. So she says that the earth should not be only a vegetable patch, but it should have a flower garden. Factories should not be more functional than the schools, means the schools should have more importance. Similarly, the men should not be considered as weapons, that other they should be considered as humans. So these were the past reflections of the Hiroko along with her own analysis. Okay, the political aspect of Burnt Shadows covers the reasons behind the atrocities and destruction of people and countries in the East, especially Asian countries. So, because these were the political events, and what happened in the novel were based on these political events. One of these reasons is the approval and even support of America and the West in general to the dictatorships in Japan in 1930s and 40s and Pakistan. So what happened? One of the reason of the support of the America was that it had supported the dictatorship in Japan. Shamsi's reference to the destructive role of the West policies in these countries can be seen through the terrible fate that Mashu Tanaka has faced. His only fault lies in his criticism of the military life in Japan and its emperor. What happened in Japan was that America had supported the military power there. Whosoever had criticized and whosoever had opposed military power, he had to, they had faced terrible fate. And Mashu, Mashui Tanaka was the person who actually opposed that military life as regulated by America. So back to Bernstein, it is necessary to elaborate further on the drastic effects of politics, ideology, and the arrogance of the superpowers in bringing about all the wholesale destruction and radiation in a city that used to be vibrant and full of life instead of death and destruction. Hiroko describes to Saja the disastrous effect of the atomic bomb. So she says the atrocities that the people were having or they were feeling there, it was not because of their fate, but because of the superpowers wrath on them, because of the ideology of the superpowers. Those nearest the epicenter of the blast were eradicated completely. Means those where actually the blast took place, people near that blast, they were eradicated completely. Only the fat from their bodies sticking to the walls and rocks around them like shadows. So what happened? Only the fats, the fats of the bodies, they were sticking to the walls and then they were showing the shadows. I looked for Conrad's shadow. I found something that I believed was not. On a rock, such a lanky shadow, I sent a message to Yoshi Watanabe, and together we rolled that rock to the National Cemetery. She pressed a hand against her spine at the memory and buried it. So this was the kind of memory she had when she got to realize that what happened was because of the superpowers atrocities. Now let's discuss the themes of the novel. Shamsi's novel has attracted the attention of different critics and fellow writers. For example, Bruce King describes Shamsi as a writer of political fiction who tackles many themes including a background of political events starting from partition, the ethnic conflicts of 1971 and 1990, down to the women's movement against Ziaul Haq's partial laws against women. The main theme in her novels is the need to look fearless at the past to understand the present. All past political events that happened in Pakistan are described in this novel. So, what was the purpose of narrating such events? Was that just be fearless to look at the past and do not get moved away by the past. Rather, consider the past and learn from the past and improve your future, or to understand the present. That was basically the theme in her novel. Okay, in this novel, there is a theme of history and culture. According to Shafiq and Yaqub, history and culture of the subcontinent and Pakistan in particular are of her other themes in all her novels. For example, her most recent novel, A God in Every Stone, discusses war, colonialism, and gender. The recurrent themes in her fiction continue to be the encounter of people from different cultures, especially in the West, as well as the great impact of history and politics on people's life. So not only the history and the culture, but also there are, politics. There's a theme of politics as well, history, in a sense that she talked about four historical events around the globe and two historical events relating to the Pakistan, particularly like event of partition. Then there was an 9/11 event. All right, and those international events also had influenced Pakistan in one way or the other. There is a theme of cultures. Because of different countries, there were different cultures. As Hiroko belongs to the different culture, she came to live here in India, that was of different culture. Okay, then there's a culture of America that is also shown. So there are history and culture in this novel. Okay, memory. Shamsi's theme of memory is very much related to the events lived and witnessed by the heroine of the novel, that is Hiroko. Hiroko lived through the culture she originally belonged to, that is the Japanese culture, with all the good memories she spent with her family and fiance. It is a lovely memory distorted by the devastation of her home, Nagasaki. So what happened? Her, her memory was distorted by the devastation of her home, Nagasaki. So she used to recollect such events, such movements which she had spent before that destruction, that explosion. Okay, I would like to conclude by saying that Burnt Shadows deserves to be called Shamsi's masterpiece because of its multiplicity of topics, the mixture between the historical and the present, East and West, the political and religious. So she had actually, there are multiple, she had included multiple topics in her novel: the topic of history, the topic of East and West, the politics, and the religion. Shamsis fill her novel with many topics such as history, the colonizer colonized relationship, contemporary politics, and the anxiety of man under such harm circumstances. So the depression, the exhaustion the person feels under such circumstances are also depicted by Shamsi in her novel. All right, that's all.